repository for developers, contractors, plan reviewers, and construction repair staff. That's a work in progress as well. We in that we did open up a new chapter in the specifications this past January. The specs are reviewed in January. They opened up a new chapter S39 and created a different place for our standard plates for related to trees. Public Works has sought formal input with the following: the Minneapolis Tree Advisory Commission. I appeared before them with a draft policy last year. They took some time and some very deliberate, good work, review work, and gave us some, returned a document back to us with some recommended changes, with a recommendation that that draft be forwarded for adoption to the council. We had made some more changes along the way, very few material changes to the document that they saw, but this has been kind of a work in progress all the last few months. They did see the version you see before us with a minor change or two last Thursday at their meeting, and other than a few minor typos and things like that, they I haven't heard back from them, but I haven't heard anything negative from them. I assume that they are still in favor of this document. I took it before the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. They had, as we were working along the way, had already provided us with some recommendations from their team that they had made resolutions to. We took those, incorporated that into the document that the Commission had reviewed, the Tree Advisory Commission had reviewed, and so they were in that. I took that document to the PAC, and they actually took a formal resolution to recommend adoption of this. The Minneapolis Advisory Committee on People with Disabilities saw this. I took it to them as well. Well, I never heard back from them as far as any sort of formal motion on their part. I didn't hear anything negative about it. They seemed quite pleased with it when I presented it at their meeting, and they were pleased. They were mostly pleased to see that we had adopted the recommendations from the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. The Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board Forestry Prevention Coordinator has been actively engaged with the Capital Project Task Force regarding new projects, working regularly with the sidewalk inspections and their contractors to minimize the impacts from root cutting, and developing a database for cataloging work and results to further improve practices in the future. The urban forestry policy has not been updated since it was created in 2004. This update was prompted by the study by the University of Minnesota. The goal of updating the policy is to react to the findings and recommendations of that study, modernize the policy, update it regarding current best management practices, and move and consolidate technical information from the policy to that single repository that is the technical specifications. A good example is that, or another way to say that is, what we've done is the 2004 version was pretty much in the weeds. It had a lot of technical information, a lot of things like that. And what we wanted to do was sort of lift it up, put it on par with things like the grading policy that we just heard about, the public realm documents. We've got the complete streets. We've got a lot of different policies, and we wanted to put it up on par and align it with that, and take out all the technical specifications, so that if somewhere along the line we want to change the root volume needed for a tree, we can do that in the review of the specifications and not have to come back to this document and all the other ones and change the information there. So hopefully they're all aligned and work together and complement each other. The advisory groups provided suggestions and inputs on the policy that were incorporated. It was a priority of the Minneapolis Tree Advisory Commission, one of the many policy or priorities, but main policies of theirs was that the policy include best management practices and follow the recommendations to create the Forestry Prevention Coordinator, the FPC. It was a priority of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee that the policy include considerations of accessibility for pedestrians. Some of the highlights to the updates to the 2004 policy. We added section 2.2.2 that you can look up that describes how the urban forest and tree roots should be considered as utilities in the same context as underground water and sewer lines. This heightens their importance for care and consideration during planning, design, construction, and maintenance, and shall be defined as and governed as part of the standard specifications for construction. Simply put, the goal is to think about avoiding and disturbing roots as much as practicable in the same way that we want to avoid hitting conduits and pipes that are underground. In Section 3, we added the following. In response to recommendations of the MTAC and the University of Minnesota report, the MPR Board of Commissioners created a new position called the Forestry Prevention Coordinator, FPC. The FPC serves to make tree-related recommendations regarding construction practices, utility work, permitting, development review, and plan design for both Public Works and the MPRB. The FPC also serves as a field representative to mitigate impacts to trees for any construction and repair conflicts. The result is that there is a person whose first responsibility is to support tree health during design, review, and construction practices. That's very different in the past when that was sort of a shared thing. Now we have one person, one steward, who's charged with that, and working with everybody else, but it's their primary focus. In Section 3.1.1, there's reference including that tree specifications and practices reference the current Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines, or PROWAG, as recommended in the city's 2009 Pedestrian Master Plan. This was a specific recommendation from the PAC relative to pedestrian accessibility considerations when making sidewalk repairs due to tree root conflicts. If sidewalk grades are changed, these guidelines should be followed. We rewrote Section 3.3 regarding tree grades to give a clear direction for dealing with tree root spaces in hardscapes. Tree grades may be used as long as appropriate accommodations are made for root spaces. In the past, tree grades were demonized, and there's sort of a hysteria about tree grades back years ago. But tree grades are not the enemy. It's how you deal with the root space underneath in hardscapes. So as long as you deal with those root spaces appropriately, tree grades are actually our friend. This was done to emphasize that it's not tree grades that are the main problem in hardscape improvements. It's providing appropriate root space that should be emphasized. We also provided references on how to find the Minneapolis standard specifications for construction. Designers are already asking for these new specifications now that they have been consolidated into the standard specifications. They're already asking for these, which is a great thing. So today, our recommendation is that this 2006 Urban Forestry Updated Policy be adopted by the committee.
Thank you. Any questions for the presentation? Councilmember Gordon.
I mostly have comments. I guess I really appreciate this coming forward and that you take the time to talk to the advisory group. My understanding is the tree advisory group is comfortable with the policy. I particularly appreciate that we talk about trees as utility, kind of raises their importance, and also the FPC. I think that's a great position. I do have a question. Is that a permanent park board position now that's in their budget that we're going to see continuing, or are there concerns about the city participating in the funding? I know there was, when we heard from you a year ago or so, there was some discussion about could Public Works help also pay for that position somehow. What's the status of all that?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, that is unresolved yet at this moment. As you remember, the Park Board Commission created the position a couple of years ago without funding it, hoping that Public Works and the Park Board could talk about a cost share of that position, because they felt a lot of the work that this position was doing was as a result of construction and maintenance activities by Public Works. It was not put into our budget for this year, so it is still up in the air. They have the position. Craig Pincala is working. He's doing great things for us, but that is at the moment yet unresolved as far as the funding.
Well, we appreciate that, and maybe with the increased support they've gotten, maybe they'll be able to fit it into their budget a little bit better. And we'll see. I also can appreciate that we moved some of the detail into the supporting documents and out of the policy, but I'm a little confused about whether the practices will actually change or how they'll change, because now the details are in different documents. And as you might recall, I was particularly a little bit obsessive about the grinding down of the roots to 6.5 inches that was in the policy. because that seemed to be something called out in the study that resulted in all the trees falling over and not all of them, but you know what I mean. Likely the trees that had sidewalk work done on them were knocked over in the wind and in the storms. And it looks like in our specifications, we are still saying that the contractor shall remove all roots within the area defined as 6 1/2 inches below the top of the new finished sidewalk grade. And it goes on with some of the same language that was in the old policy. But then it does talk about roots larger than 2 inches require an inspection before they're ground down. I mean, do you think that is a significant change in practices, and are people going to be aware of that when they're doing sidewalk repair?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I know there is, especially the commission, Tree Advisory Commission, was hoping that there would be a policy that would state there would be no roots cut. And I think everybody would like to see that, but the reality is that the best we can do is to minimize that. The specifications that are on the website right now are still a living document. We have a different set that we need to incorporate. We were doing the updates to the policy and the updates to the specifications sort of in parallel. We do that in January, and we still have another document. The Park Board Forestry Department actually has another set of specifications that are much more inclusive and much more detailed. We will also be putting these into our standard specs next year. We created the place to put them, but we'll have them, and these are the documents that contractors and developers see now.
So I might even be looking at the wrong document or one that will be out of date soon?
You may be looking at, if you're looking at the specs on the website,
Yeah.
Yes, those still need to be updated with these more current specifications.
And are we going to say that any roots larger than 2 inches require an inspection before they're ground down? And is that what the forestry department thinks makes sense?
What everybody seems to agree to is that when the contractors discover a root 2 inches or greater that needs to be cut, that triggers a visit from the FPC. The FPC will come out and make a determination. What I think I can say is that while roots are still being cut, a lot less are being cut. Another thing that they're doing is a lot more ramping of the sidewalks, still staying within the pedestrian with the pedestrian accessibility guidelines, arcing around, ringing around the trees in order to minimize that root cutting. So between those two, we are definitely cutting a lot less roots. Also, another thing that forestry is doing is they've created a database that when we do work or they do have to cut roots, they're recording that. They're looking at the type of tree, the location, what they did, what the steps they took to try to mitigate the root cutting and effects to the tree, recording that. And they'll actually go back out. In fact, they had some data from last year, and we had another wind event this summer. They went back out and took a look to see at some of the ones that we'd worked on last year if they'd been affected. So far, we haven't seen anything, but that's the kind of thing they're doing. They're creating this database so they can, as a learning document or as a learning tool, so that they can, over time, they'll be able to understand what things were successful, what things weren't, and make changes. And that's how those best management practices and specifications will be updated. One of the ways that they'll be updated to reflect what they find over time.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Gleason.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just had a follow-up on that scenario because with our sidewalk contractors, we have the benefit that we have a relationship with them through our contract, and we have oversight of the contract and all of that. And I would say a place where I've actually had more complaints is with utility work. And of course, there's not that kind of relationship there, especially with folks who have a franchise with us. You know, we kind of, I don't know what are all the procedures. I know they touch base with the permit folks, but it's different even than just issuing a permit for their work because that's the nature of having the franchise. And so I guess my just question there is, it seems like we will need some work to develop procedures so that those who don't have that ongoing contractual relationship with the city also understand these new requirements. And of course, they're not going to be creating documentation for us on what they cut and what they don't cut if they don't have that ongoing relationship. And I know they don't like to bring in, they probably have to bring in smaller equipment to do more detailed work. And, that again is something they probably perceive as a cost to do that. So I just wanted to raise that publicly and hope that that's kind of part of our procedural work on how we're going to think through ways to send that strong message to those who do that kind of work too.
Mr. Chair, and Councilmember Glenn, I can briefly respond to that. The idea of treating these tree roots as utilities when we're doing sidewalk work came from meetings that we had from the utility companies. We met with them in the field. They understand that they don't just saw roots down anymore, that as they pull their permits, they have to comply with our standard specifications and standard plates. They're doing a lot more boring. They're doing a lot more air spade work and things like that. That whole idea of treating them as utilities came from that practice and that thought. And so, and the Forestry Prevention Coordinator is also involved in much of the work that they do too. So I think we have a good connection there as well.
Well, and that leads into when utilities from complaints that I get, and maybe others as well, it's not so much from how they treat the roots, it's how they treat the branches vis-a-vis how they interrelate with the wires. And though they might be comporting with best practice guidelines in terms of trimming branches, aesthetically, you get that slingshot effect and it's very unpleasing. But then that goes to being very conscientious of context and species selection moving forward as well, which I think our practices are cognizant of that and is embedded in the document and how forestry does their business. So all good conversation. Any further questions, commentary? Seeing none, thank you for all this work. It's certainly a due, if not overdue, update. And I think continuing conversations and looping in data, studies, best practices. I think the continual review of when there should be an appropriate trigger for the next update to make that kind of part of a more ongoing conversation, I think is the intention.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to acknowledge that this was a really great collaborative effort between our court and Public Works. It took a village, and it was a great experience working through this.
Thank you. So with that, I will move approval of adopting the updated 2016 Urban Forestry Policy. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. And we now come to our last item, discussion item 23, which is the Downtown Public Realm Framework Plan.
Lacey Shelby, the principal planner with Community Planning and Economic Development, will make the presentation.
And I can still say good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Council members. Thank you for the opportunity to come forward and share this new policy document that we're asking for your review. The Downtown Public Realm Framework Plan is a thematic plan that is covering 14 neighborhoods in downtown Minneapolis and across the river. It's a policy framework that really looks at the connectivity and the relationship and character of downtown streets. The Downtown Public Realm Framework Plan is consistent and complementary to the city's existing policy documents, including Access Minneapolis and especially the Complete Streets policy. It was shaped in collaboration with many stakeholders, including a technical advisory committee and a steering committee, as well as done in very close partnership with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, which was I would say a new type of strategy that we deployed and was very successful. We addressed this project because we were seeing that there were some challenges looking at Access Minneapolis when all downtown streets were considered activity streets. There's a hierarchy of transportation uses, pedestrian uses, and greening uses in those downtown streets. And the idea was to take a closer look at defining what type of streets we wanted to move forward with. And this came out of a significant community engagement process where we hosted 27 events and projects in the different participating neighborhoods. We also worked closely with the technical advisory team and the steering committee to define these streets into different typologies. As you can see from the map on the screen, each of the streets, there are 3 different typologies, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about them. We have a destination corridor, a local commerce corridor, and a connector corridor. The destination corridors are characterized by, are mostly considered regional destinations, Hennepin Avenue, First Avenue, where we're seeing a larger volume of pedestrian activity. The local commerce corridors are consistent with a less intermittent pedestrian traffic and is geared more towards the downtown population and the residents and workers of the area. It accommodates more generous planting in the public realm and a range of building uses. Connector corridors are really those corridors that are connecting some of the various neighborhoods around the street and are characterized by the most intense greening, where similar connector corridors provide lots of opportunity to really direct and guide people to the different greening opportunities in downtown. Another aspect of this process, which was a 2-year process, was identifying some access points and linkages and connections that have been previously identified in policy documentation in several of the small area plans in this area. And finally, what's important to sort of illustrate as part of this plan is that it's a thematic policy that identifies typologies of streets, but really it's about partnerships with, special service districts, with different community groups, with property owners and private developers to really look at the streets as a more stewards of the streets, about shared responsibilities. The city is responsible for pieces identified in Access Minneapolis, but we're really looking for partnerships when it comes to some of these more enhanced elements. We executed a significant inventory of downtown Minneapolis and the type of features that are already included. I'll say elective features that were either encroachment permits, including planters, and we have over 4,000, I'd say, elective features by different property owners across downtown. And we're really looking at those features to enhance a more connected and a more distinct downtown. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions for the presentation? Really appreciate the work. It's nice to have sort of a framework with definitions that we can all share and use when we talk about these different streets. So, and context is everything. Councilmember Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know this came through the CD committee as well for a much bigger discussion, but I just wanted to note here that, plans like this have a way of coming true. And I think that map, it's got a lot of sort of wonky planning terms on it. But it's really important. And I think as we see our downtown grow, especially our residential population growing, new businesses are locating downtown from the suburbs for the first time in a long time. These kinds of investments in our public spaces are really important to people living downtown, to those businesses deciding to locate in the heart of downtown, many of which are attracted by the transportation options we present. So I just wanted to note that it just really all links into our plans for growing sustainably as a region, for making sure that downtown continues to be the business center of our region, that these often really small investments in our public realm make a really big difference. And I think as our downtown grows, we'll start to see these lines come to life as trees and benches that people enjoy sitting on. And over time, again, that just really continues to contribute to the growth and vitality of our city. So I really appreciate this.
Thank you. Councilmember Glidden?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the work. I know it's been several years in the making. I actually have just like a really simple comment, which is that I think it's actually just significant that we have a plan now that uses the language public realm. I mean, so this is something I think that is trying to get us to understand these common places, these public places, and the importance of them. And then my hope is, I know there's been work kind of outside of the downtown context and trying to understand what's our responsibility just as community to engaging in the public realm, what's the public's responsibility then to investing in that public realm and making it inviting and a nice and safe place to be. I mean, just most simply those concepts. And I think they're, kind of over time, we've kind of gotten away from this concept of thinking about public realm and kind of the range of initiatives that are about the pedestrian space, the bicycle space, just thinking of more than just street is a place for a vehicular traffic. And that is kind of our most I think, common way that we think of a public space, but it's, of course, a lot more than that. So anyway, I just wanted to say I think that this is significant for us to call this out, to say that this is important space and we need to do more work around this space. And so thank you and the many others, and I think Kirsty Munson here for also really wanting to spearhead that work. And thank you very much, and all the staff who worked on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think very important to call that out, Councilmember Glidden. And rational frameworks and wonky titles can beget implementation that results in beloved places and maybe even a nice nickname here and there for these wonky terminology that we had before us. But again, thank you for the work. You really can't move forward and realize things unless you know what you're talking about and have, a rational framework to proceed with the work. So great tool before us. With that, I will note that we are approving this action to approve the Downtown Public Realm Framework Plan as an articulation of an amendment to the comprehensive plan, and that I should clarify that this will be approval as amended in the very robust discussion that took place in the CD committee. So with that, any further conversation? See none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay, that carries. Thank you very much. And we have exhausted our agenda and are thereby adjourned.